Hi friends, welcome back once again. This session discusses some of the approaches in teaching English like the structural approach, communicative approach, humanistic approach, natural approach and eclectic approach. Structural approach sees language as a complex of grammatical rules which are to be learned one at a time in a set order. In humanistic approaches, Suggestopedia points out the pedagogic application of suggestions. Total physical response stresses the importance of physical activities in language learning. In silent way, the aim of the teacher is to say as little as possible so that the learner is encouraged to produce as much language as possible. Natural approach gave importance to real communication and naturalistic language acquisition. Eclectic approach seeks the merits of all the approaches in teaching. Edward Anthony, 1963, with specific reference to language learning, describes an approach as a set of assumptions dealing with the nature of language and language learning. Approaches are axiomatic. Methods of teaching are based on selected approaches. Within one approach, there could be several methods. Some of the important approaches in teaching of English are the structural approach, the communicative approach, humanistic approaches, the natural approach and the eclectic approach. Let us discuss each approach in detail. The structural approach. The structural approach or the structural oral situational approach is an eclectic approach evolved as an alternative to direct method of teaching English as a second language. It is an outcome of the experiments carried out in the language teaching in the army camps during Second World War to develop foreign language programs for military personnel. The Army Specialized Training Program ASTP was established in 1942. It was the brainchild of two prominent linguists, Harold Palmer and A.S. Hornby of Britain, and the structural linguist Charles Fries of University of Michigan. For Fries, grammar or structure was the starting point in teaching language. The language was taught through intensive oral drilling of the basic sentence patterns, giving importance to pronunciation. In the book Teaching of English as a Foreign Language, Menon and Patel, 1971 says, the structural approach is based on the belief that in learning a foreign language, mastery of structures is more important than the acquisition of vocabulary. Language is viewed as a structurally related elements for the encoding of meaning, the elements being phonemes, morphemes, words, structures and sentence types. According to Hornby, language item, whether it be a word or a structure, should not be presented in isolation. It has to be presented in a context situationally. He called it situational approach. As C.C. Fry says, the only true and correct meaning of words are the situations in which they are used. The new language item should be presented in appropriate situations, real or contrived. The SOS approach is the presentation and practice of carefully selected and graded grammatical structures of English in effective, meaningful situations, initially through speech and later through reading and writing. Language is always used in reference to a particular context or situation, as full meaning of a language unit is known only when the situation is known. The structural approach broadly lies on the oral approach, drill method and situational approach. The SOS approach is based on the following principles. Language is primarily speech. The order advocated for the learning of language skills is listening, speaking, reading, writing. A language is a set of habits. stimulus response theory of B.F. Skinner is relevant in SOS approach. Drill, practice and reinforcement play a vital role in language learning process so that the behavior will occur again and again and ultimately become a habit. By using situations, the use of mother tongue can be avoided. Role plays, dramatizations, simulations, etc. can be effectively conducted in the class to create meaningful situations where learners can use the structures in the target language naturally. The characteristics of SOS approach. Speech is primary among the 4 language skills. Oral practice is given for the new language items before they are presented in the written form. Reading and writing are based on the language items which have already been introduced and practiced orally. Learning a language is not only learning its words but also the syntax. The structural and vocabulary items are graded according to their usefulness, frequency and teachability. General service list is referred for the selection of vocabulary items. The language items are presented and practiced in meaningful situations using concrete objects, pictures and realia along with actions and gestures, avoiding explanations and use of mother tongue. A structural syllabus is a list of basic structures and sentence patterns of English according to their order of presentation. While selecting structures and vocabulary for a structural syllabus, we should consider the aim to teach, class, students' age, capacity, class time, teacher's ability, etc. Simple, useful structures and words which are easy to express has to be taught first. The gradation should be from simple to complex, known to unknown and concrete to abstract. Some of the techniques used in SOS approach are situations inside and outside the classroom, pictures, cutouts, drawings, objects, models, verbal situations, drills, language laboratory exercises, substitution table, etc. The communicative approach. During 1960s, functional linguists like Firth and Halliday pointed out the functional aspects of language like to learn and to discover, to express personal feelings, regulate the behavior of others, to get things done, etc. According to Hims, a sociolinguist, communicative competence not only involves the ability to apply the grammatical rules of a language in order to form grammatically correct sentences, but also to know when, where, how and with whom to use these sentences appropriately. This resulted in a new perspective on language and language learning. The goal of communicative approach is not just communication but to achieve communicative competence. Cannell and Sain identified 4 constituents of competence. They are grammatical, mastery of language codes; sociolinguistic, ability to produce and understand utterances in social background; discourse, ability to combine meanings with unified and acceptable spoken or written texts in different contexts; strategic, verbal and non-verbal strategies which learners may need to use like fillers or to make speech effective. The basic principles of communicative approach. The goal of language teaching is to develop communicative competence in learners. Teacher is the facilitator of learning. Learners are communicators. They learn to communicate by communicating. Activities like games, problem-solving tasks and role play promote communication. Language functions are emphasized over forms. All the 4 skills listening, speaking, reading and writing are given equal emphasis. Language is presented in the form of continuous discourse rather than isolated sentences. Mother tongue is not used. All communication takes place through the target language, English. Errors are tolerated as an inevitable part of the language learning process. A learner is encouraged to be fluent. Accuracy is important but only secondary. Features of communicative approach. All communicative syllabus aim to make the learner attain communicative competence. They emphasize the appropriacy of language use. Communicative tasks aim to make learners fluent as well as accurate in their use of target language. Communicative syllabus emphasize the functions of language rather than their rules. Communicative syllabus rely on systematically organized language learning materials. The tasks set are meaningful and purposeful. It teaches the language needed in different situations to express and understand different functions. The prime focus is on learners. The teacher is just a facilitator, an organizer who helps the students become autonomous learners. The communicative syllabus is learner generated and learner centered. Acquisition of language rather than language learning takes place in autonomous language learning situations. Teaching based on communicative approach is eclectic. Techniques used in communicative approach. In communicative language teaching, information gap tasks are used. They are introduced in the class using the following techniques. Language games are communicative and are intended to improve language skills. Any language game is integrated by its linguistic goal. In mind-engaging tasks, problem-solving activities are provided in the classroom, realizing that a learner learns well when his mind is on the task to be done in the language rather than on language itself. Role play develops the ability to manipulate language in social context, which is an important aspect of communicative competence. Retrieving text order is done through scrambled pictures and sentence technique. The learners become familiar in the use of cohesive devices, anaphoric pronouns and semantic clues through these activities. Peer interaction through group work and pair work is an effective and natural means of acquiring language features useful for communicative competence. Merits of communicative approach. Learning will be a self-generated exercise. Group work and pair work develop confidence. Fluency, appropriateness and accuracy are acquired. Learners feel free to speak as there is no inhibition of grammar. Demerits. Communicative competence cannot be realized in overcrowded classes. Students may not take initiative to speak in English. An average teacher may not be able to exploit the various experience of the students in helping them develop communicative competency. Humanistic approaches. Humanism is an approach to life. It is a system of thought that rejects religious beliefs and centers on humans and their values, capacities and worth. Earl Stevick, 1990, classifies the most important characteristics of humanism as follows. Feelings include personal, emotional and aesthetic appreciation. This aspect of humanism tends to reject whatever makes people feel bad or whatever destroys or forbids aesthetic enjoyment. Social relations. This side of humanism encourages friendship and cooperation and opposes whatever tends to reduce them. Intellect includes knowledge, reason and understanding. This aspect fights against whatever interferes with free exercise of mind and is suspicious of anything that cannot be tested intellectually. Self-actualization. The quest for full realization of one's own deepest true qualities. This aspect believes that since conformity leads to enslavement, the pursuit of uniqueness brings out liberation. Humanistic approaches were introduced by the ideas of scholars like Erikson, Roger, and Maslow. The Longman Dictionary of Applied Linguistics 1985 defines the humanistic approach as, in language teaching, a term sometimes used for what underlies methods in which the following principles are considered important: the development of human values, growth of self-awareness and in the understanding of others, sensitivity to human feelings and emotions, active student involvement in learning and in the way learning takes place. For the last reason, such methods are also called student-centered. According to Lee, 2007, humanistic approaches emphasizes the importance of the inner world of learner and place the individual's thoughts, emotions and feelings at the forefront of all human development. The humanistic approach tends to see language learning as a process which engages the whole person and not just the intellect. It takes into account the emotional and spiritual needs of an individual. The philosophy behind such an approach is that the ideal world should consist of autonomous, creative and emotionally secure people, Brumfitt 1982, and education should and can assist in creation of such a world. Earl Stevick identifies 3 dimensions according to which humanistic courses differ from others. They emphasize the centrality of the learner. He is more important than the subject matter or the teacher. The purpose for which the learner is learning language has to be considered. The learner has independence and autonomy in the classroom. He is not helplessly dependent on the teacher. We are concerned about the process of learning. We should focus on learning about learning rather than learning or teaching per se. The 2 methods which reflect the philosophy of humanistic approach in its fullest is the silent way and community language learning. Suggestopedia and total physical response are the other methods which consciously incorporate some of the tenets of humanistic approach. The silent way. The silent way was evolved in the 1960s by Caleb Gatengo, a mathematics teacher who believed that silence, as instead of repetition, seems to be a powerful aid to alertness, concentration and mental organization. The process of learning is facilitated when the learner discovers or creates rather than remembers or repeats what he hears. It is based on the premise that teaching must be subordinate to learning. The teacher should be as silent as possible in the classroom and the learner should be encouraged to produce as much language as possible. Earl W. Stevick has described the role of the teacher as teach, test, get out of the way. The important teaching aids used are the Fiddle chart and the Cuisinier rods. The Fiddle chart consists of blocks of different colors on a black background. Each block of color represented a different sound in the target language. Cuisinier rods are wooden rods of different lengths and colors, each of which represents different sounds or words in the target language. Cuisinier rods are used to build up words and sentences. The teacher picks up different rods and encourages learners to respond. She teaches words and phrases and similar language patterns mainly through demonstration. Using a fiddle chart, teacher silently points to a block with a pointer and waits for the learner to produce the corresponding sound. In a no response situation, the teacher says the sound and the class repeats it. This technique is used to teach long vowels, short vowels, consonant sounds and finally words. There is lot of opportunity for self-learning, peer interaction and peer correction. The teacher speaks only when absolutely necessary but uses a lot of gestures during the class. The silent way emphasizes on the accurate repetition of sentences modeled by the teacher and shares some of the principles of audiolingualism. The teacher follows the principles of known to unknown. While the teacher remains silent and plays an indirect role, the learners assume greater responsibility of their learning. It encourages peer interaction and group cooperation. The errors are dealt through self-monitoring and peer correction. They are trained to depend on their own resources and thus attain greater autonomy. Community language learning. This method owes its origin to Charles Curran, a professor of clinical psychology from Chicago. He developed counseling learning, which involves the application of psychological counseling techniques to language learning. A climate of caring and sharing is created in the language classroom. The teacher is the counselor rather than a figure of authority. She is a person who not only knows the target language but also the one who understands the struggle faced by the learners while learning something new. She is supportive and works positively to help learners overcome their fears and worries towards learning the language. The method emphasizes whole person learning. Learners' personal feelings while learning a new language is given importance. According to Curran, the 6 elements necessary for learning are security, aggression, attention, reflection, retention, and discrimination. At the beginning, feelings of security and a sense of belonging are established in the learner. He then achieves a measure of independence and begins to assert his identity. Later, he feels secure enough to take criticism and starts working upon improving his style and knowledge and linguistic appropriateness. CLL takes place either in small or big groups which forms the community. The teacher counselor remains apart from the group, observing student activities without approving or disapproving their performance. The request for help is made by the learner in his mother tongue. He needs help to say something clearly and meaningfully in the target language. The teacher provides the learners the help they needed. Self-correction is also promoted. Language is for communication. In CLL, the focus shifts from aspects of grammar and phonetics to actual sharing of ideas, beliefs, opinions, wants and desires. Suggestopedy. Grigory Lazanov, the Bulgarian doctor of medicine, applied the principles of suggestology, a science concerned with the systematic study of the non-rational and non-conscious influences to language learning. He believed that the enormous potential of human brain was used very less by most people due to many psychological barriers. Suggestopedia is the pedagogic application of suggestions. It aims to help learners overcome the fear that they cannot be successful. Suggestopedia removes learners' mental barriers in learning and helps them to reach the hidden reserves of the mind. The teacher's main job is to remove the suggestive barriers. Functional aspects of target language are emphasized. The classroom activities are usually accompanied by some soothing music. Some relaxation exercises are given before the class begins. The principles of suggestopedia may be stated as follows. Learning takes place when learners feel unthreatened, comfortable, secure, interested, and amused. Anxiety and boredom are the chief enemies of learning. Learners learn best by gaining access to the reserve powers of brain. In learning, there is a harmonious collaboration of the conscious and unconscious levels. The atmosphere, the method, materials and techniques should aim at infantilization so that the learners have a childlike, open-minded attitude to learning. Fine arts like dance, drama, etc. aids suggestions and has to be integrated with teaching learning process. Total physical response. TPR was developed by James Asher, a professor of psychology at St. Joe's University, California. It is linked to the trace theory of memory from developmental psychology. Memory associations will be stronger if memory connections are traced intensively and frequently. In TPR, language is learned through physical activity. Successful recall and learning takes place when verbal activities are combined with motor activities. Listening comprehension is the basis of TPR. Lot of opportunity to hear the target language before attempting to speak is given to the learners. TPR attempts to coordinate speech and action. The commands issued by the teacher are demonstrated and the learners follow it. For example, sit, stand, bring the book, go out, rub the board, etc. Later, learners give commands and rest of the class performs the task. In the process of acting them out, learners learn the language. Comprehension is regarded as the meanings of developing competence in language. Oral language is taught first and writing later. Enough time has to be given to absorb the new language before the learners are asked to speak. TPR may be regarded as a revival and extension of Palmer's English through actions updated with reference to recent psychological theories. Asher suggests that TPR is a set of techniques which could be used in association with other methods. The natural approach. The natural approach of language teaching was developed by Stephen Krashen and Tracy Terrell in 1980s. This approach gave importance to real communication and naturalistic language acquisition in the classroom settings. The language output is not forced but allowed to emerge spontaneously after the students have attended to a large amount of comprehensible language input. The approach is based on activities which can build communicative competence. The three main principles of this approach. Focus of instruction is on communication rather than its form. Speech production comes slowly and is never forced. Early speech goes through natural stages. The characteristics of natural approach. Interesting, comprehensible inputs at low anxiety situations. Little importance to error correction. Conscious learning of grammatical rules, drills and repetitions. Emphasis is given for learning new vocabulary items rather than new grammatical structures. Intrinsically motivating classroom situations are created for language learning. According to Terrell, the learners passes through three stages in their acquisition of speech as comprehension, early speech and speech emergence. In comprehension stage, the focus is on developing students' vocabulary knowledge through the process he called binding. The technique of teaching words through gestures and actions as in TPR are more binding than mere translation, which helps them stick in students' long-term memory. Adequate time has to be provided to listen and absorb the language before the learners are required to speak. This is referred to as silent period. Usher 2000. The teacher should model rather than just verbally explain tasks and skills and use lots of pictures and real objects. Teacher can check the comprehension, permitting the learners to answer non-verbally. In the period of early speech, the learners answer simple questions and use single words and phrases while communicating. Early speech production should be practiced when learners have developed a recognition level of 500 words. This stage encourages the use of acquired knowledge and avoid the use of L1 plus monitor mode. In the speech emergence stage, students take part in activities requiring more advanced language. The activities can be games and recreation activities, humanistic affective activities, that is, activities which have personal appeal to students' values, ideas, opinions, goals, feelings and experiences, and information and problem solving activities. They are now able to answer questions including how and why, which requires fairly complex responses.
Integers having primitive roots,
but does not adhere to the theory strictly. According to Krashen, acquisition requires meaningful interaction in the target language, natural communication in which speakers is concerned not with the form of their utterances, but with the messages they are conveying and understanding. Krashen's theory contends that the conscious learning has no effect on learners' ability to generate novel language, whereas Tyrrell is of the opinion that some conscious learning of grammar rules can be beneficial while learning a language. The eclectic approach. We have a lot of approaches and methods at our disposal. Each one of them has their merits and demerits. Eclectic approach is the collection of the merits of all approaches and will not contradict to the theories of language learning. It is a label given to a teacher's use of techniques and activities from a range of language teaching approaches and methodologies. Before designing an eclectic approach, some of the factors to be considered by the teachers are the objectives to be achieved, the content to be taught, age and ability, and the past experience of the learner in learning English, the available resources, the teacher's aptitude and resourcefulness, etc. The best approach or method is capable of attaining more objectives in less time. It ensures the development of fourfold language skills and caters to creative and imaginative development of the learner. A good teacher will not stick on to any single approach or method. The teacher is the master of the teaching situation and the methods of teaching are the tools in her hands. A teacher with knowledge of the theories of language and language learning can successfully and effectively design her own eclectic approaches in her class. To quote Nikos Kazantzakis, true teachers are those who use themselves as bridge over which they invite their students to cross, then having facilitated their crossing, joyfully collapse, encouraging them to create their own. Before we attend the next session, try to answer the given question. Eclectic approach is more suitable for teaching English in Indian classroom situations. Do you agree? Why? Books for further reference. English Language Teaching, Approaches, Methods, Techniques by Geeta Nagraj, 2004, Orient Longman Private Limited, Kolkata. Approaches and Methods in Language Teaching, 2nd edition, Jake Richard, Theodore Rogers, 2001, Cambridge, New York, Cambridge University Press. Hope the session benefited you. See you next time. Bye.